Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. It was just a few years ago, around 2020, when my buddy Ava worked at a small travel agency called Wanderlust Travels in Vancouver, British Columbia. The owner, Mrs. Kim, ran a tight ship with just 3 employees: Ava, an older lady named Marge, who was in her mid-60s, and another younger woman. Marge was a real piece of work, always trying to weasel her way into getting extra time off beyond her vacation days. She'd falsely claim overtime hours by saying she came in after hours to catch up on stuff, even when Mrs. Kim never asked her to. Despite getting called out multiple times, Mrs. Kim was hesitant to fire Marge because apparently Marge had sued her previous employer for wrongful dismissal and won a nice settlement. When Mrs. Kim retired in 2022 and offered to sell Wanderlust to Ava, she took the plunge while keeping Marge and the other employee on staff. Ava laid down some ground rules: no unauthorized overtime, proper procedures for requesting time off, all that jazz. Marge still tried her usual tricks, but it was tougher to pull one over on Ava. Here's where Marge got extra sneaky, though. Ava was a single mom with 2 hockey-obsessed sons, so she'd sometimes duck out an hour or two before closing to get the kids to practice or games. Smart old Marge would wait for Ava to leave, then book herself a cheeky day off without asking, knowing Ava couldn't really say no after the fact. Annoying, but with the no OT policy, Marge couldn't milk it for unearned pay anymore. One time, though, Ava had given clear instructions that Marge and the other woman couldn't take any days off because she'd be away for a weekend hockey tournament with her boys. She explained it verbally and in writing. A few days later, Ava swung by the office on a Saturday and discovered Marge had booked a trip to Vegas for her daughter's family, plus a flight for herself to Calgary, conveniently aligning with the dates Ava would be out of town. Via email, Ava told Marge she couldn't have those days off as requested. Marge straight up lied, saying she needed to help her daughter after a medical procedure and look after her granddaughter in Calgary. When Ava called her out about the Vegas booking, Marge stopped addressing the lie and went on this rant about her years of dedicated service and how she deserved better. She then dropped the bombshell. She was putting in her 2 weeks' notice and retiring. After running it by her accountant, Ava realized this was her chance to cut ties with Marge on good terms. She prepared for the Monday morning showdown, boxing up Marge's desk items, including files with client info that Marge hadn't digitized, having her boyfriend as a witness, and lining up the other employee for support. Right at 9 a.m., Marge waltzes in all cheery until Ava lets her know the jig is up. She's accepted Marge's retirement, hands her a check covering that week's hours and 2 weeks' pay, and tells her to scram. Marge is gobsmacked, sputtering, "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire." When she realizes the client files are missing from her belongings box, she demands them back, but Ava refuses because that data belongs to the company. It quickly escalates into a standoff, with Marge digging in her heels until Ava's boyfriend calls the cops about a disturbance. The officers show up, separate the parties, and after hearing both sides, they remove Marge's stuff and escort her out for good. As the final cherry on top, Ava puts up a big "Congratulations on your retirement, Marge" sign in the window and takes out a cheeky newspaper ad doing the same. She even checked the "retired" box on Marge's termination paperwork, disqualifying her from unemployment benefits. Ava had gotten the last laugh on her problem employee's bogus retirement claim. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my family's old farmhouse for as long as I can remember. My grandparents built it back in the 1950s, and it's been passed down through the generations ever since. Even though the farmland got sold off over the years, we held on to the house and the 5 acres of property around it. That old farmhouse means the world to me. It's where I took my first steps, lost my first tooth, all those little milestones. So, you can imagine how upset I was when my new neighbor tried to claim that a chunk of my land actually belonged to him. This guy's name was Ronald, and he moved in a few months back when the old Johnson place next door went up for sale. Right from the start, I could tell this dude was shady. He just gave off that vibe, you know? The first week after he moved in, I caught him surveying my property line with these measuring tools. When I asked what he was up to, he gave some bullcrap excuse about making sure his fence line was accurate. Yeah, right. I told him flat out that he'd better not try any funny business encroaching on my land. Ronald just chuckled and said, "Wouldn't dream of it," as he walked away. But I could tell by the look in his beady little eyes that he was scheming something. Sure enough, a month later, I get a letter in the mail from Ronald's attorney, claiming that the creek bed running through my southwest field actually belonged to the property next door. And not only that, but he was demanding access via a new road he planned to build. Well, let me tell you, my blood boiled when I read that. There was no way some shyster lawyer was going to swindle me out of land that had been in my family for generations. The next day, I marched right over to Ronald's front door and gave him a piece of my mind, and a few colorful words too. But he just stood there acting all innocent, saying, "It's out of my hands now, I've got my legal team on it." And then he had the audacity to offer to split the land with me, as if I'd compromise on something that was rightfully mine. When I told him there was no way in hell I'd give up any of my property, he got real smug and said, "Well, I tried to make this easy for you, but we'll just see what the judge decides." That's when I realized I had to lawyer up and take this scumbag down. Luckily, my cousin's husband is a real estate attorney, so I gave him a call to explain the situation. He was happy to help me out with family discount on his fees. He sprang into action right away, requesting to see a copy of the supposed deed that Ronald was claiming gave him rights to my creek bed. Of course, it was complete baloney. That deed clearly showed the property ending at the fence line by the creek, not including the creek bed itself. My lawyer told me not to engage with Ronald at all until we had our court date. He didn't want me accidentally saying something that Ronald could twist around, so I avoided that snake at all costs, which wasn't too hard since I'd started working longer days on the farm. Finally, our big day in court arrived. I put on my nicest suit and prepared to fight for what was rightfully mine. As we waited for the judge, Ronald leaned over with a smirk and whispered, "You know, we can still make a deal." I ignored him. No way was I settling out of court now. When the judge arrived, Ronald's lawyer did his whole song and dance about the supposed deed. But my lawyer was ready. He pointed out how the creek bed wasn't included in the deed's boundary lines. Then he provided an old survey of my family's property from the 80s that clearly showed the entire creek area belonged to our land. Ronald's lawyer tried to say that survey was not official, but the judge wasn't buying it. Finally, it was my turn to testify. I explained how my family had owned this land for generations and even showed old photos of my grandpa fishing in that very creek as a boy. In the end, the ruling was swift. The judge upheld that the creek bed and surrounding land unambiguously belonged to my property. He dismissed Ronald's claim in full and even reprimanded his lawyer for wasting the court's time with such a frivolous lawsuit. You better believe Ronald's face was redder than a ripe tomato. I couldn't resist flashing him a smile as the bailiff escorted him out of the courtroom. After all that stress and hassle, it felt amazing to have my full ownership rights upheld. The judge ordered Ronald to cover all my legal fees too, so at least I wasn't out any money over his nonsense scheme. With this lawsuit completely dismissed, my family's property was firmly secured once and for all, so let that be a warning to you. Don't let greedy neighbors try to cheat you out of what's rightfully yours. I'll be keeping my eyes peeled in case Ronald tries any other tricks, but something tells me he's learned his lesson. My farmhouse and land are here to stay under my family's care, just as it should be, and I've got the court documents to prove it. The next one is a petty revenge story. Not my story, but a neighbor's. We lived in a cul-de-sac with a 90-degree bend 1/3 of the way in. At that point were the gates to a primary school with their grounds on the opposite side of the road to all the houses. I learnt to leave for work before 8 o'clock and not try to return home at end of school between 14:45 and 15:30. It was always a mess, barely room for 2 cars to pass, even if none were parked on the pavement or not. His particular problem was a garden fence that ran along his side boundary adjacent to a meter, 3-bar path. The last post was at the point where path went from along his property to in front of it. Over a year, parents reversed into this post, mounting the pavement to do so, and with enough speed to break or dislodge the 100mm 4-post, he was pissed as it was costing him to replace the post and fence, whilst the guilty parents just laughed. During the summer break, he replaced the post with an iron I-beam and painted it brown. First driver to reverse into it did a good job on their car and knocked on his door demanding compensation, as did the next few. He just laughed. Pointed out they were breaking the law by mounting the pavement and 4 inches curb at speed before shutting the door on them. The next one is a malicious compliance story. At my first job decades ago as the junior employee on the IT staff for a school, I was in charge of setting up email addresses for new teachers. The district had Microsoft Exchange for email, and the education policy was that all teacher email addresses would follow the same format, first initial, then last name, unless we had another teacher of the same name, which never happened because we only had approximately 400 teachers in the district. However, we did have a new teacher, Greg Roper, who I decided to just set up as simply Roperg. Once all the new usernames were set up, my boss, our bureaucratic assistant principal, reviewed them all and sent me a short note, telling me to fix Greg's username to comply with the school's standard format. Well, I didn't see the note until my next workday, and by that time principal's assistant had left for a vacation to Hawaii. Facing a deadline to publish all the emails for the school website and back-to-school email, I went ahead and followed orders. Username changed to Groper. Email set to groper@washingtonunified.org. Pushed to production. And everything was quiet for about a week. But then students began to receive their welcome emails directing them to contact their teachers using the newly assigned email addresses. Next thing I knew, I got an urgent, slightly flustered call from the principal himself. I printed off that email directive from the assistant principal and went up to the principal's office, where I found both of them sitting side by side. Apparently, several concerned parents had already contacted the school, questioning the appropriateness of the teacher's email address. The assistant principal, still tan from his vacation and wearing one of those obnoxious Hawaiian hats, kinda like this, started to low-key chastise me for not catching this sooner. Well, his sunburned face turned even redder from embarrassment when I plopped down the email thread from a week earlier, where he explicitly asked to make Greg's email comply with school policy. The principal's expression was priceless. The assistant principal left with his tail between his legs, and I had a new email, Roperg, created for the teacher that afternoon. Greg was so grateful that he actually took me to lunch, joking that it was the least he could do after the crazy ordeal. The next one is an entitled people story. First, I should start this by saying I am homeless. I have been homeless for a few months now, but I am almost out. I am very lucky. I don't drink or do any drugs. I just got caught in a bad situation. I am also very lucky. I am better off than most homeless people. I have my hobo camp in the woods. It's a small hobo shack hidden by the trees with a small spot in front of the entrance of the shack, all enclosed by pine trees. I barricaded it using sticks and wood, so there's only one entrance. Even that has some large branches you have to move to get in. With all that said, for the most part, my shelter has kept me safe and warm through the winter. But now the good weather is in, and I have had the pleasure of coming into contact with some interesting people. On the outside of the shelter shack part of my camp, I have a small firebox where I prepare all of my meals. The thing has given me any hot meals. I can't live without it. I was making my breakfast lunch, so I had it all fired up, and I was making a very simple lunch. Canned chili, stag chili, the best canned chili, and 2 eggs. I was cooking it all in one pot. I was sitting cooking and heard footsteps. I personally believe because of homelessness I have a nice case of PTSD because footsteps freak me out. My heart starts pounding when someone is close to my camp, so I was on edge. The stomping gets closer, and before I knew it, someone literally walked through the barricade. He pushed his way through, looked around, looked at me, my firebox, and sat down. He had a beer in his hand. At that second, I was too stunned to do anything, like, literally in shock, too stunned to move. The guy spoke and said, "Hey buddy, how are you?" The guy was hammered, like drunk, stupid drunk. He said, "Oh hey, what you got there, buddy?" I am still sort of in shock. I said, "My breakfast." He said, "Oh good, serve it up." He wanted my breakfast. I was like, "Dude, what do you want? It's time to go. You barged into my camp, you're drunk, it's my food." Unfortunately, he wasn't just drunk, he was unstable. The guy started shouting nonsense at me. I told him I didn't care, time to go. Now this is where it got terrifying for me. The guy lunged and grabbed the pot with my scalding hot chili and eggs. I stood up and had my hand out, kinda to cover my face. I figured I was about to get my chili in the face. Nope, the guy looks at me and throws the pot up and over the trees, out into the forest. He threw my food, like threw it. You should also know I am a big guy, but by no means am I a tough guy. I haven't been in a fight in my life, and violence goes against my nature. But I grabbed the stick I used to move the coals around my firebox and started screaming, "Get out of here! Go!" like he was an unwanted animal. I guess I scared him because he took off running drunk stumbling. I found my pot. My food was everywhere, unrecoverable. I am really pissed off. I was saving that can of chili. Now I'll have to wait until tomorrow for breakfast/lunch. But yeah, that's the kind of crazy you have to deal with on a daily basis when you're homeless. The next one is an entitled parent story. Preface. My girlfriend and I are both 30 years old and have been together for over a year with a brand new baby that was born 2 months ago. I have 3 children of my own with an ex-wife that we all have been a happy blended family. My girlfriend, me, my 3 kids, and the new baby. Beginning of the signs. Girlfriend's mother has always been very controlling of her life and knows ways to manipulate her with words, texts, phone calls, and mind games. When she got pregnant, her mom was always overbearing about how we should be raising the baby, which name to pick. Always trying to get my girlfriend to stay at their house. My girlfriend has her own apartment that she pays for but is constantly pressured to stay with her parents, and still treats her as if she is a teenager. Examples of this are that we both vape, nicotine, and her mom threw a freak out over this and blew up her phone about how she has ruined her life now and the baby's. Fast forward to the baby being born. It was supposed to be a special moment. Her mom, my mom, and I were in the delivery room with me by my girlfriend's side. When the baby was born, we asked for time to bond with the baby. Instead, her mom refused the requests and stayed at the hospital for the entirety of the time, giving neither my girlfriend or I time to be alone with the baby together. My girlfriend is very introverted and shy and is scared to ever stand up to her mom. We've always argued over me telling her to grow a backbone and set boundaries with her mom, as this is our child and this is our lives. That the only two people that know what's best for the baby is her and I, not her mom. Nail in the coffin. When it was time to leave the hospital, we went home with the new baby, and come to find out, her mom is planning to stay for weeks at my girlfriend's apartment with us. I had FMLA leave to spend this time with her and the baby. The first night home, her mom came into the room we were in at 5 a.m. and told us to turn off the TV. At this point, I couldn't hold back anymore. Long story short, I went off on her mom and told her to duck off and leave us be, and that she was an overbearing idiot. I know this isn't the correct approach, but I just couldn't take it anymore. Her mom then told me that my kids were losers and that I am a loser and that her daughter doesn't need me in her life. My girlfriend didn't say anything, she was just in shock. Didn't stand up to her mom at all. Her mom told me to leave, and it was a huge argument. She called her husband, girlfriend's dad, to come over and threaten me. I ended up leaving. Month of withholding child. Girlfriend then said we can't be together anymore because I insulted her family and disrespected them. She went dark on me and I wasn't able to see my newborn son now for a month. I couldn't believe it. We were super close, and she was nothing like her mother, but her parents are so good at brainwashing her that she believed every word they said. Finally, she began sneaking over to my house when I had my kids for the week, or sneaking me over to her apartment when I didn't have my kids for the week. Her apartment is too small for my kids. Her mother would drive by to see if my car was ever there, and vice versa to see if her car was ever at my place. She finally found out, and I told my GF that she needed to set boundaries and that this was overbearing and controlling, reminding her that she is a 30-year-old adult and should be able to live her life as she should. Current situation/present time. She told her parents that she sees me, but that we aren't together, although we sleep in the same bed, are romantic, and still sleep with each other. Since she told her parents that, she began letting me see my son less and less, 2 nights a week if I'm lucky. My kids are always asking where she and the baby are because they love them to death and haven't gotten to see their new brother that often like we planned. Each time she goes to see her parents, they instill new brainwashing techniques on her because one night we'll be together having a great time, taking care of the baby and bonding. Then after she sees her parents, she seems to have a firewall put up where she says, "We can't stay the night with each other, we should leave at 11 p.m. now." She admitted this is all things that her mother is making her do, and that basically she must abide by what they say. They have nothing being held over her other than watching the baby while we both work. I have told her a million different ways how this is super controlling of her mother, and that if she loves me, then she should stop letting her mom control her like this. This always turns into a fight because she doesn't know how to confront her mom. I have tried telling her that she holds more power than she thinks she does. For example, she could bluff and tell her parents to stop controlling her and how she lives by saying they will no longer be allowed to see the baby anymore. She always seems to enjoy being with me, cuddling, talking about how she loves me and how I destroyed everything because now her family doesn't like me and that we have to say that we aren't together anymore, that I almost feel she believes this and that we are just co-parenting. I am at a loss of what to do. I can't make her see reason that she is being controlled and manipulated with these evil, sick texts and calls from her mom. It feels like she is brainwashed and doesn't want to cut ties with her mom or her family or set boundaries and is going with whatever they say. I've tried to detach myself from her, saying I can't be with someone who is under this control, but if there was some way to make her realize that her mom is ducked up, then maybe we could finally raise this baby together instead of her mom believing that this is her mom's baby and not ours. Any suggestions? If it comes from me, it comes off as disrespecting her family, and she punishes me and my kids by keeping them away. When it comes from her mom, it's like gospel. I could take her to court, but her parents are rich and I don't have money for a lawyer. My child is being withheld and her mind is constantly changing on if she's supposed to follow her heart and be with me, letting me have time as the father of our baby, or if she's supposed to just stay away from me and raise the baby with her parents in her sheltered life with no friends. What do I do? Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.